macOS 16 is going to be a redesign. Why is it going to be a redesign, you may ask? Well, there are a couple of things that we need to talk about. First of all, there are a lot of rumors going around that iOS 19 is going to be a redesign. And Apple these days likes to take iOS features and port them over to the Mac, and then call that the new macOS version. Now, while I think we will get exclusive features inside of macOS 16, I think the main focus point is going to be the new design of macOS 16. Now, you may have seen that there are not any rumors at all about macOS 16. So why would you expect a redesign, Willie Apple, you may be asking? Alright, so quick little update. This video was filmed a little bit before this rumor came out. And it says that macOS 16 will bring the biggest design overhaul since iOS 7. So this is going to back up my point, and I still do have a point of what I'm going to talk about right now. Well, there are a couple of things I need to talk about. macOS 14, some big Apple leakers like Mark Gurman said it was going to be a small incremental update, bringing over features from iOS to macOS. Well, that did not end up being true, and we got the introduction of desktop widgets and brand new screensavers, along with a brand new lock screen with a lot of other enhancements, and to be honest, not a lot of things came over from iOS. So I expect macOS 16 to be a lot more than just an incremental upgrade, considering that macOS Sequoia could be considered as an incremental upgrade. In fact, I actually believe iPhone Miriam was supposed to be becoming a macOS Sonoma, but was actually delayed. Now, this is a completely different video to talk about, but I feel like macOS Sequoia was supposed to just add window snapping and then a bunch of bug fixes, and that was it. But that did not end up happening. Now let's talk about historical releases of macOS. So we used to be on a big, small release cycle. For example, macOS Yosemite was a big update, macOS El Capitan was a small update. Then we got Sierra, big, High Sierra, small, Mojave, big, Catalina, small. And then we had Big Sur, and then we had Monterey and Ventura. However, I would consider Monterey and Ventura to both be smaller updates, and Big Sur being the big update. Now, I do not think we're going to be on a 2-year cycle of big, small, and then big, small again. I think we're going to be getting big, small, and we're going to go back to that. Now, what happened in 2022 to cause macOS Ventura to just be the small update? Well, we got system settings, and we got a couple of continuity features, stuff that I would consider as smaller. And macOS Monterey was mainly just an incremental upgrade, probably because iOS 16 was the big update. I feel like Apple at this point is going to be doing big iOS 1 year, big macOS the next year, big iOS the 1 year, big macOS the next year. And with the macOS updates, obviously the iOS update is going to be a lot bigger than the macOS big updates. I think they're going to try to include like a watchOS update or maybe a visionOS update or a tvOS update. In fact, we got big iOS updates, watchOS updates, and tvOS updates all in 2023. So I think we're going to see a similar pattern. And I think iOS is just going to be like a big design and Apple Intelligence and that's it. But macOS is going to be a lot more. Now, here's why I think we're going to be getting a redesign in macOS. If you go into a new tab in Safari and you just haven't clicked anything in the Show iCloud tabs quite yet, you'll notice that there are some weirdly designed buttons for Not Now and Turn On. These are not the default bordered buttons and bordered prominent buttons that we had inside of current macOS. This is what they look like nowadays. The Show iCloud tabs prompt is actually very new, and it came out in macOS Sequoia. Next thing, if you were to open up the Xcode app, this was a change in 2023 by the way, we got black borders around it. In fact, we had this black border change with Spotlight Search, but in macOS Sequoia was reverted back. So I think Apple is kind of testing a couple of design changes to see if users notice them or like them or not. Next up, if we go to the Image Playgrounds app, you're going to notice a couple of different things in there. You're going to notice that there's a plus button on the bottom in addition to the top. Now, if you look at the iOS app of Image Playgrounds, you'll notice that the button is not on the top at all, it's only on the bottom. Now, I have a theory that the bottom button is going to be a brand new API inside of macOS 16, and developers are going to be encouraged, instead of putting them on the top of the toolbar, they're going to be encouraged to put them on the bottom of the app. Finally, the last prominent design change is with the TestFlight app. Now, usually these design changes are present in Mac Catalyst apps. However, I've determined that the TestFlight app is not a Mac Catalyst app at all. We got a couple brand new things in here, including a new form layout. Now, we have the default form in iOS, however, I think we're going to be getting a form design change. Which means that apps like System Settings are going to look completely different. So these borders inside of System Settings are going to be going away, and it's going to look more like iOS. Plus, we also have the addition of navigation transitions inside of the TestFlight app, something that is not present inside of System Settings at all. So I would also expect that to be included inside of macOS 16 as well. Now I can keep going on and on about minor detail changes inside of macOS Sequoia. However, I don't want to bore you with all that. I just want to prove my point that I think macOS 16 is also going to be a redesign. Now for another topic we need to talk about, last year we were rumored to be getting an iOS 18 redesign that never happened. However, I believe that it was Mark Gurman who said that it could be iOS 18 or next year with macOS following right after. Now my theory is that the iOS 18 design was supposed to happen, but they had to tweak a few things, which is why the Photos app looks just completely different. They had to experiment with it a little bit more before releasing it to everyone. And I believe that with macOS 16, they're just gonna make it happen the same year as iOS. So macOS redesign is sure to happen at some point. Now the last thing we need to talk about is Apple wants consistency between Apple products.
And we brought our unified language of symbols to the Mac. There's a new way to access system-level controls and a unified space for notifications and widgets. We wanted consistency throughout the ecosystem, so users can move fluidly between their Apple devices. But we also love that Mac icons have a deep history and a distinct look and feel. So we retain many of the highly crafted details and the playful elements that make Mac icons unique. This OS reflects an important history. It's familiar, but it's also entirely new in every detail. We love it.
So if they're going to redesign one platform, they're going to want to redesign macOS as well. This was a big factor with the macOS Big Sur redesign. They wanted macOS to look more like iOS just so it's more familiar to a newer user, but still familiar to a person who has used it for years. And since they're supposed to be redesigning iOS according to leaks and rumors, I think they're going to want to redesign macOS as well on the same exact year just so they can continue selling Macs during that year. So they need to wait at all just to pump out more money. Since at the end of the day, this is mainly about money and they don't want iOS or macOS looking older than the competition. They're kind of seeing that iOS is looking a little bit older than usual. So it's kind of time for Apple to need to push out a new macOS design. Now let me know what you think about these statements down in the comments down below. And thanks for watching, comment, subscribe, share this video with your friends. All my apps in the description down below. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye!